I hate taxes, right? There's 30 million new lawsuits filed here in the US every year. When I got out of law school, I didn't want to work with my grandfather. He was just so well known. Okay, I think taxes are going to go up. If anybody writes a book after 2024, I'm not going to believe they actually wrote it, right? We've had failures and you learn a lot from the failures.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to the Wealthy Dentist Podcast. I'm your host, Ward Powell. And if you're a dentist looking to crack the code on how to grow your practice and dominate in this space, then stick around. You're in the right place. Every week, we're sitting down with some amazing dentists who are doing incredible things in their businesses. We're talking about everything from how they keep their teams loyal and dedicated to how they stay ahead of the game in this crazy, fast-changing industry. You'll hear about hacks like using virtual assistants to free up your time, strategies to make more sales with less effort, and even mind-blowing stories about patents and inventions that are changing the industry as we know it. And it's not just about growing your practice, it's also about finding out what works from a clinical perspective. Whether you're just starting or you're ready to scale to the next level, there's something here for you. So buckle up, hit that subscribe button, and let's dive in. I'd like to, first of all, say that I am so happy about this person that I'll be interviewing today. That we're going to have a little conversation about something very, very, very dear to my heart. You know, something I'm kind of like, I mean, it's like way up there, way up there in terms of uh, urgency, importance, being able to map things out in a way that's going to help people and their loved ones, and then so forth, so on and so forth for many, many years to come. Done right. This expert is going to be able to give you this information in detail and things that you won't be able to, like, we won't be able to go over today. You'll be able to get it through him, through a number of different channels. But help me give a warm welcome to attorney Andrew Howell. And really don't need a whole lot of explanation who this guy is. I mean, for those of you who don't know who he is, he's an outstanding attorney, and he's got a long lineage of attorneys in his family, and we'll be able to talk about that a little bit as we go forward. But Andrew, thank you so much for coming in and joining us this morning. And I'd like to just let you take over and just talk about you and your family, your business. I'm gonna be quiet.
I appreciate all that. I gotta live up to that. But you actually didn't set the bar very high, right? You said I come from this lineage of attorneys, and the top three hated professions in the entire world are attorneys, financial consultants, insurance agents, a lot of times, and used car salesmen, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Before I went to law school, I actually got licensed in life insurance and health insurance, and I keep my license active, not because I sell insurance, just because I think it's such an important part of estate planning and families. So I've been two of the top three hated professions, right? My best friend is a used car salesman, so I think top three. Now, interestingly enough, number four is dentists. So, I appreciate the introduction very much. Yeah, maybe I can just give you a little bit better understanding of what I do in terms of my practice, and then happy to dive into where I got and why I got here, why for some unknown reason I decided to go to law school, all that kind of stuff. So, right, if you and I were to meet in an elevator and you looked at me for some reason and said, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" Nobody's done this, by the way, Ward, in 23 years of me practicing law. And it's because my wife, she tells me that I have resting bitch face. I apologize if you need to edit that out. I guess I'm not very approachable, but I'm a pretty nice guy. But I'd say, look, Ward, I'm an estate lawyer, okay? And that's a horrible, horrible elevator pitch, right? But when people hear that, they go to wills and trusts and what happens when you die and providing guardianship for kids and It's an extremely important part of estate planning, but it's just part of it, right? It's what are you doing with your estate at death? It misses this whole other aspect of what are you doing with your estate while you're still alive, and how is that estate functioning in the most tax efficient manner? That's business structuring, other kind of tax planning things. I mean, I definitely consider myself a tax attorney, and again, I'm an open guy here. I'm not hiding anything. I hate taxes. Okay. And I think it's a good thing, right? You work with a tax lawyer that loves taxes, get out of their office. But there's definitely things that you can do that make things more efficient and keep more money in your pocket. And then also, how do you keep all of your hard work from everybody that wants to take it from you? Right? There's 30 million new lawsuits filed here in the US every year. And then you have a professional like a dentist or anybody in that dental or medical industry in general, you're just more likely to get sued. And how do you protect all of that stuff? And that's this whole concept of asset protection. Now, asset protection to me is a game. Okay. And I'm not trying to minimize its importance by calling it a game. It's a really important game that people should play because it'll be played against them if they don't. But
Right?
there's many different ways to do it, from some simple things that you can do, like in, my case, I live here in Utah. We're a separate property state. My wife and I have very different liability risks on a daily basis, right? I'm a blood-sucking vampire lawyer, right? Every time I speak to a client, and I work with high net worth clients, so it's usually about pretty high amounts. If I mess something up, I could be sued, right? And my wife, on the other hand, she's a stay-at-home mom, or she'd prefer the term domestic engineer. And I will call my wife whatever she tells me to call her, because I could never in a million years do what she does, nor would I want to. But our chosen professions carry different liability risk. And beyond all of that, my wife's so much better looking than I am, and people like her a lot more. I'm getting sued before my wife. So in my situation, if you were to see the title of the home that I live in, it's in my wife's trust. That gives me this argument, right? That you sue me, Ward, for some reason. I'm going to say you can't go after the home that I live in. Now, is that a winning argument? I don't know. But remember, this is a game, and it's an argument. And I can throw that at you. And now what you'll have to do is spend thousands of dollars in the courts trying to sue me and come after me and beat that. And I haven't lost any enjoyment over the home. My wife still lets me live in our home rent free, which I think is pretty nice of her. And that's the problem with asset protection. The more you want, and kind of goes with tax planning as well, the greater the loss of control and enjoyment you have to deal with. You have to just say, okay, I'm willing to deal with that. And the goal in asset protection is to try to find that sweet spot. Looking at a client, what are their risk factors, and getting them to the point where they pass the sleep test, right? Where they're sleeping well at night, knowing things are protected, but not where they lost control and enjoyment. Like you could go to some offshore locale, the Cook Islands everybody talks about. My favorite is actually Nevis. But you go there, you set up a trust in Nevis, you put your assets there, you keep your nose clean for 1 year. Creditors don't come after you for 1 year. Then the assets that are in that Nevis trust technically are protected forever from creditors. It's tremendous protection, but to do it the right way, I think the last one I did was somewhere between 40 to $50,000 in legal fees. It's really complicated to do it the right way. And there's a lot of these gimmicky things that I hear about all of the time where, hey, I'll do an asset protection trust for you that, might be here locally or domestically in the US, and then it springs back to the Cook Islands and all of these various things. In my personal opinion, those don't work very well. And to do it the right way, it's expensive. But what I think is more affecting my clients, a lot of them don't care about the cost that much. It's the amount of control and enjoyment they give up, right? They move their assets to another country. And yeah, we got issues here in the United States. Don't get me wrong. I personally love this country, but we're the most stable economy in the world. And I want my assets to be stateside. I don't want them to be in another country, to be quite honest. And then you have to deal with this trustee in Nevis that controls this trust for you. So a tremendous amount of control and enjoyment is lost. Great protection, and there's other tax benefits and things that go along with that. But you kind of have to get a feel of where somebody wants to complicate their life and to what level. So That's basically what I do, and I definitely do wills and trusts, and I think that's actually the most important thing that people should start with because as long as you're on this planet, okay, I can form a new LLC for you. I can set up a trust in Nevis for you. But if something happens to you tomorrow and you haven't done any planning, which most people don't, only 30% of the population ever does any estate planning at all. And even those that have done it haven't been reviewed in 18 years on average.
Right.
So, it most likely hasn't been updated. But if you go through that path, then it's complicating things. You're bringing lawyers into your life. A lot of what I hope to do for clients is to keep lawyers out of their lives, right? Which sounds funny coming from a lawyer, but I don't feel like a real lawyer. I mean, I love the attorney jokes. I think that they're very well earned, just not by me, right? I don't take people to court. I don't sue them. I don't make your life worse. Hopefully, again, I'm going to help you sleep better at night. So
Right.
that's a kind of little bit about what I do. Um, Questions on that? I don't know where I could follow up or
That is
clarify
so
anything.
wonderful. Yeah, I wanted people to get a little gist of what you do. I mean, we're just scratching the surface, folks. Trust me on this. Uh, but so I know you're the director and co-founder of Cornology, and I want people to learn a little bit about that. And I found out about Andrew through one book I read. And then later on, he told me about a couple books that he'd written. And I wind up purchasing one. I'm going to get the other. But I want you to talk about chronology a little bit, Andrew, if you could.
Oh, Lord. We were wondering who the one person was that bought our book. So I'm really happy that we know it's now you. No, so this is what happened. I was taught to practice law. You alluded to this earlier by really my maternal grandfather, my mom's dad, and he was an amazing estate lawyer. He actually was born in Rexburg, Idaho, in 1918, and my great grandfather was a fur trapper. And my grandpa grew up as poor as you can imagine and worked really hard to get out of it. Graduated valedictorian from the University of Utah and went to Harvard Law, got accepted to Harvard Law School. And my parents were divorced when I was 4 years old. And my grandpa really stepped in to be much more my kind of father figure than my real dad was. And he was this incredibly successful estate lawyer, doing what I do. And his clientele included names that everybody would know. I mean, I don't want to list them necessarily, but big names. And when he passed in 2006, he'd done very well. But what he also had done is taught me a lot of the values that I hold dear to this day. He was, and I'll be honest, I hated him for it at the time because he was on my case all the time. My sister and I were raised very differently. I mean, he was old school, and so men should work, women should marry. So, and at 12 years old, I was expected to be at his office, working in his law office as a runner, right? Doing anything that I was told to do. Go for it was called at the time. And, go for this, go for that, whatever. And, but what I wasn't realizing then, and certainly realize now, I mean, it was obvious, and I just a stupid 12-year-old kid, but he was giving me experience. He was saying, okay, look, I'm not just going to tell you what to do. I'm going to show you what I'm doing. I'm going to show you how I live my life and mentor you, right? And he expected a lot of me. I mean, really, and that's what I mean. I despised him for it at the time, but it gave me great work ethic. I tell this story in our book. I think you're referring to Entrusted, and this is a dead true story. 99% of my stories are true, Ward. This one's true. I was at his office, and it was a couple of years after I started there, so maybe 14, 15, and I I was thinking highly of myself, as sometimes you do at that age. Life has a way of humbling you over the years, but 14 and 15, you haven't necessarily hit some of those punches quite yet. So I was coming out of the break room or whatever, and I was talking to one of the other people that worked there, one of his younger associate lawyers who I kind of had a friendly relationship with, and I made some arrogant comment to the fact that our family was wealthy or that we were rich, okay, to some effect, okay. Now my grandpa he was 6'2". I'm 5'9" on a good day, depending upon what shoes I'm wearing, right? He was 6'2". ex-military. He was in, the Air Force. He flew planes in World War II. Like he was just this no nonsense kind of a guy. And he never laid a hand on me or anybody else that I ever saw in my entire life until this day. Okay. And what happened is I felt his hand on the back of my collar. And I don't know if he actually lifted me off the ground, but in my memory, that's what happened. I kind of floated, and the next thing I know is I'm landing in his office. He slams the door behind him, and I get up, I dust myself off, and I'm fairly intimidated by my grandfather. So he looks at me and he says, "I want you to understand something. I am rich. You don't have squat." Okay. Now, he did not use the word squat. Okay. And I think about that. I think about that on a daily basis. And I did just fine. And I mean, we live a comfortable life for sure, but I get up every morning and I think about that. And it makes me, it's motivation. And positive, negative, whatever, you can put a spin on it, but it's motivating, right? And so this was this important person in my life, and but he also taught me how to practice law, at least how I understand it to be. I was again early on in starting. He represented this one of Utah's billionaires even at the time, so we're talking years and years ago. He owned Sinclair Oil and owned a bunch of hotels and a whole bunch of kind of stuff. But he was a really fabulous man of his own caliber. So he was coming in for a meeting with my grandpa, just kind of an update about some new asset that he had purchased. And my grandpa said, "Hey, do you mind if my grandson comes in and watches?" And he said, "No, come on in." And my grandpa, of course, is you sit there and shut up, don't say anything. But he wanted to, again, give me this experience. So what I did is I watched these two gentlemen who I thought very highly of. I knew who this guy was, and they had a conversation. That's what it was. It was my grandpa asking about this asset and how it was going to fit into his overall legacy, let's call it. That, I know that word's used a lot in my world these days, but that's what he was trying to, they were going to, now when my client tells me typically about a new asset, it might be a vacation property in Florida. This was, I think, a mile and a half of oceanfront property in Santa Barbara, California. So much different aspect, right? But it was impactful because when I got out of law school, I didn't want to work with my grandfather. He was just so well known that I wanted to make it on my own, right? All these now retrospect, I should have worked with him, but because I probably set me back just because I had to carve out my own path. But I digress because I do love what has transpired. But um, when I got out, I started at what's now by far the largest law firm in Utah. It's part of the largest law firm of the entire world right now. They were acquired a few years ago, but and I had a wonderful mentor there, somebody I think very highly of to this day, and kind of mentors really, really important in life. I always say that, but he took me under his wing and kind of taught me the mechanics of how to practice law, the let's say quote the business of it, right? Like in your world, there's the artistry of what you do inside somebody's mouth. And then how do you get paid from that, right? Two very different things. And how are you running your office and all of those various things. So I kind of learned a lot of that logistics, nuts and bolts stuff from this great attorney. And he was very sophisticated estate lawyer himself, worked on high net worth families. In fact, he had an association with my grandfather because he was so well known. But 7 years into it, I was tired of it because they did it completely differently. And I would expect that a lot of your viewers or listeners of this are gonna feel this in terms of what they've done with their planning, if they've done it again, which is it feels very, it's like a factory, right? It's what we call a trust mill. You get referred to some bloodsucker like me. They reach out to you and they say, "Hey, give us all of your information. Tell us what your net worth is." You then have this meeting where the the lawyer tells you what you should do, not really listening to what you're trying to accomplish, punches out a bunch of documents, wills and trusts and so forth that are, cookie cutter or boilerplate, as I always hear. Looks just like your neighbors because they think everybody wants the same thing and we don't, right? And then you never look at it again. It sits on your shelf forever and it collects dust. And your estate planning in general is never over for as long as you are still breathing. and things change, right? Certainly family dynamics change. One of the busiest days of the year for me, Ward, is the Monday after Thanksgiving. And it's because, families have all been crammed together for 4 straight days. They hate each other and they want to change their estate planning now. So that, stuff like that happens. Who do you want your guardian to be this year might not be the same after Thanksgiving dinner when you find out your brother-in-law thinks completely differently than you thought he thought, right? Those things happen. And definitely tax laws are going to change on us. And so that continual review of the estate planning is such an important part of it. So, but it didn't feel right to me because that's not how I saw my grandfather practice. Again, I never, in that conversation that he had with that billionaire client, I never once remember them talking about how much that property cost. Because sometimes when I tell that story, people say, "What was the price?" And I say, I honestly don't remember because it was just a conversation of the impact that asset was going to have, how it fit into their planning. And that's what I thought it was. And instead, not just this factory where you're trying to churn clients and you're trying to just, make money. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't work for free. My wife wouldn't be with me if I did, right? So, it's what I do for a living. But you have to know, what you're building, right? I have to know the blueprints before I build the house. And a lot of times I think one of my, bigger critiques of my profession and my colleagues are they go immediately to this is the house you want rather than understanding the dynamics of the family. So that kind of gets us to where, kind of into the book that led me into that whole diatribe. So I apologize. But um, after the 7 years that I was at my first firm, I left and went out on my own for a couple of years. And that was insane because I was had some momentum then. I was, my practice was growing and it was just too much to handle. So that's when I met my law partner. I mean, we knew each other because it's it's Salt Lake City where I practice out of. We refer to it as Small Lake City because you know everybody. So we knew of each other, especially in the estate planning world. But we were working on a case actually. He was representing one side of a family, and I was representing the other side of the family. And they were in sort of a contentious estate battle. And I just called him up and I said, "Look, David, let's go to lunch and see if we can work this thing out." So we did in about 15 minutes, as lawyers should try to do, right? And I just said, look, I'll lay it out for you, you lay it out for me, and we'll just try to get this thing solved. So then we spent the rest of the lunch just kind of talking about our practices and our philosophies, and I told him I was drowning. I'm like, I need help. So he invited me to join the firm that he was at the time. It was more of a medium-sized firm, which I liked. I didn't want to go large firm at all again. And it was very well known for their estate practice. They had a senior partner there that was, actually another protege of my grandfather. In fact, this lawyer dated my mother in college. Remember what I said, Small Lake City. So, but he was very, very well known, and so I was happy to join that firm because of their estate practice. Again, same experience, very much like a trust mill. Didn't feel right. There were some internal issues that were going on in the firm that I wasn't aware of when I joined it, and so David and I said, like, we'll just start our own. So after a few years, in 2013, we started our current firm, York Howell, and our goal at the time was to just be a small boutique tax and estate planning firm, and it's grown beyond that. I think we now have 28 lawyers that work with us, and I mean, like 60 office staff. It's just crazy, but it's grown organically just because I think people like that more personal approach because that's what we do, right? We meet with clients, we spend 60 to 90 minutes with them, totally complimentary because the client might not like me and want to work with me, but just understanding what they need and what they have going on in their lives. Tell me about your kids. Do you have, happy, healthy kids? Are there financial issues going on? Do we have drug dependency issues going on? And a lot of affluent clients and their children have more of these issues, unfortunately, than some other people do. So, or groups of the population do. So it's grown organically, but what also we tried to focus on is what we both hold true, I think, in our planning to this day. There are many wonderful, fabulous, great tax and estate lawyers throughout the country, and that can do your trust write the most beautiful language in the trust, and they it's perfectly done, and every T is crossed and every I is dotted, and so forth. But what my clients mostly are wanting is something a little bit more, because we do excellent work, and I hopefully see that with no ego. Our tax and estate group, I think we're now at 9 attorneys that just do tax and estate. 4 of them have master's degrees in taxation. David York, my law partner, is a CPA as well as being an attorney. So he's doubly boring to go to dinner with. But we have great expertise, right? But what we bring is this other idea of, okay, legacy. And that's where the book Entrusted came in. Um, I went to Dave and I said, look, we need to we need to identify, and he agreed, obviously, and had some, definitely had his own ideas on everything on this as well. But what have families done well, right? What are the successful families that can take what they've built and pass it on beyond 3 generations, right? It's the adage we all hear now, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. And the first generation makes the money, the second generation spends the money, the third generation goes back to work, right? And they're really, I think, we clearly identified some core principles that families do well to navigate this, right? And we call these entrusted principles or entrusted families. And the first is that entrusted families, they know who they are and what they believe, right? That's our first core, knowing your core values. And very few families, I think, can articulate that. I mean, if you say, hey, what are your core values? What are your spouse's core values? What are each of your kids' core values? And what's so important about core values is they're they're 100% developed based upon life experience, right? If I told you my top 5 core values were, you'd think they're admirable. If I found out what yours were, I know I'd think they're admirable. But there's a 1 in 15 million chance that you and I will have the same top 5 core values. And it's because we live different lives. Like, just as an example, one of my top core values is honesty. Okay. That sounds pretty dishonest coming from a lawyer, but I mean it. And it's because early on in my life, there was a person in our family that was really dishonest with us. And it created issues certainly growing up, but in some ways, maybe still today in terms of family dynamics and so forth. And I just said long ago, I'm going to be truthful wherever the cards, whatever that means. And in this politically correct environment we live in, I usually say something that makes somebody upset. But if I'm sitting there and I'm able to identify that within my family, and we have this, that's where chronology comes in. Over the last 10 years, we've developed a whole software service that allows families to go through this in a very, very easy way, because most families are really busy and don't have a lot of time to dedicate to it. It's a learning software. It's really neat. We can talk about that more. But understanding those core values, because now I'm explaining this to my family, right? We're talking about the report, and I'm saying, hey, look, honesty is so important for me, and all of these reasons why. And what am I doing? Well, I'm not being preachy, right? I'm not scolding anybody. I'm not coming off in a negative light. I'm like, Thomas, he's my oldest, you were so dishonest last, week. Shame on you. I'm just saying, look, that's who I am. That's who Dad is. That's what's really important to me. It tells them maybe a little bit more how to deal with me.
Mm-hmm.
They wreck my car. I'm not going to be happy, but we have insurance. But if they lie to me about it, I'm going nuclear, right? So, how does everybody tick? And now you sort of put that at the centerpiece of whatever estate plan you're going to do. I mean, we work with financial planning groups. We have large financial planning groups that license our software to take their clients through. In fact, one group that manages $1 trillion, if you have more than 10 million in net worth, you have to go through Chronology before you ever talk to one of their advisors. And it's because, look, if that advisor has a report that says, hey, I know what each of those clients value, do you think that advisor might structure their sales pitch a little bit differently in terms of, hey, I don't just care how much your net worth is. This is what I want to do. I want to structure a financial plan. And this, when I say financial planning, there's a lot of mean, you have estate lawyers that fit into there, you have CPAs that fit under that umbrella, you certainly have financial advisors, insurance agents, all of these people that you need to have as your team working for you. And I do believe it needs to be a team approach. But now you can say, hey, look, like if I meet with somebody, let's say, and I'm actually thinking about interviewing a new accountant, I'm going to send them my Coreology report. They know me, they know my wife, they know my kids, they know our collective core values as a family. And I would expect all of my financial advisors, remember that umbrella of advisors, to know those things. And now you set a completely different tone, right? First of all, the client, I think, takes control. They're the ones saying, this is what I want, this is what I want to accomplish. And then the technicians, I, it's all a lawyer is, an estate lawyer is. They have all these tools on their tool bench, all these different trusts and things that you can use to try to accomplish that goal, right? I got the blueprints and I know it has to build. And that is, I think, a completely different message than a lot of our colleagues are still taking. And it's a generational shift. People are thinking about this in a different way, and if you think about it, it makes sense. You a lot of estate planning and wills and trusts and all of these various things and how we use them in a modern way, and even financial planning concepts are predicated on a couple of thoughts. Well, I want to bundle up the most amount of money and pass it on to the kids tax free, the least amount of taxes possible. And there isn't a whole lot of thought put on the impact of that money. And we're going to see the largest wealth transfer in human history over the next 30 to 40 years. It's somewhere between 75 to 90 trillion dollars that are going to be passed. And that's almost entirely unharnessed. And it really is kind of generational thing. Going back to the greatest generation, right? My grandfather's generation. They lived through a time that's unlike we've ever lived through. I mean, we all went through the Great Recession and we were all unhappy. They went through the Great Depression, right? And they weren't eating. They were standing in soup lines to feed their family. And he had this, my grandpa had this saying, and I don't think it was his, but he always said it, which is that money isn't everything, but it sure quiets the nerves, right? If you're worried about where your next meal is coming from, how you're going to feed your family, money becomes pretty important. So you come out of that Great Depression and you got some money in your pocket and you're not worrying about that any longer. What do you want to do for your family? We want to create safety nets for our kids. And so, look, I want to bundle up my assets and pass it on without the government taking it a whole. Now I'm a firm believer of that as well. But what it did do also is it created the trustafarian, right? The trust fund baby. And you have the baby boomer generation who has now put us in a $36 trillion deficit, right? So, and look, the baby boomers out there, I love you guys. I think I'm Generation X. I don't know what the heck I am. It's different. Now, that also brought on a different hierarchy of priorities where they're not having to worry as much about financial issues. It brought on things like social change and the 60s and that kind of a revolution, which was all wonderful, right, for society in general. So there wasn't, hey, just that financial aspect. But our generation, who are now becoming in control of everything at this point, right? I'll be 50 years old this year. I say that and my heart skips a beat a little bit because I don't feel 50. But we're the ones that are kind of directors and CEOs and running our companies and in charge of our professions and maybe even thinking about how to exit out of our professions at our age. We want something different for our families. I mean, we definitely want the financial security but we want the assets to last and we want them to mean something. We want them to have impact as well. And how do you align those intangible goals, again, core values and what does the family ultimately want to have over the long run with their tangible assets? And I think far few colleagues of mine are talking about it, um, even doing it, and certainly knowing what to do and how to do it. I can't, I mean, I go to a conference to speak probably at least twice a month. And I don't know if I hear now terms like core values and all of these things coming up. 10 years ago, when we wrote our book, nobody was talking about it. And so I love it. I think it's a generational shift that is going to be so impactful because if you can put couple more hours of time. And I know we're all busy, but carve out a couple more hours of time and take your family through this and get clear about what your core values are, what your communication styles are. And I thought that was really interesting in terms of when my family was going through it, because we kind of measure, and everybody takes their own test, if you will, and the kids, you ask them, are you listened to in the family? Do you have a voice? And I quite frankly never listened to my kids, but they felt like we do. So whatever I'm doing something right. Now, a lot of times parents are really interested to see that their kids don't feel listened to. And I'm a huge, huge, huge believer and fanatic about including your kids as early as you possibly can. I mean, we were in investment meetings, investment advisors and accountants. Again, we were 10, 11 years old, that started. Told to sit there. We were allowed to ask questions, ask a question, but we just kind of sat there and absorbed the conversation. Um, Not necessarily through all osmosis, right? But my grandpa would explain things. And by the time I was 18 years old and graduating high school, I knew a whole lot more about that world than my predecessors did. And I didn't know everybody else wasn't getting that kind of training. So that's where the book comes in. I said, okay, look, we're gonna do this. Now, after we wrote the book, I joked earlier, we've actually had a pretty good response from it. I truly did believe that two people were gonna read it. My mother, maybe, but my high school English teacher, because she wouldn't believe I could actually read a book, let alone write it, right? So, but it's actually had a pretty good response. But I would say the biggest negative, or I shouldn't say negative, maybe criticism is even too harsh, but feedback is now what? Because you read the book, and quite frankly, they're not new ideas. They've been around forever, time and eternity, right? Remember, modern planning has only been around, say, since the teens and 20s, if you will. Before then, it was more holistic. Right? Families met, they talked about who they were, they had an identity, they had family crests, all of these kind of things. And we've lost that. And everybody's on their devices and isn't communicating and so forth. So this is just an amazing tool because when people are saying, now what, we had to develop something. Now, what it was first was basically a trading card game where you would sit down. It would take about 5 hours to play. If you can imagine trying to get a family to carve 5 hours of time out to do anything together, right? But they play it, and what everybody winds up with, because of having to give things away, less prioritized, you wind up with your five core values, right? And then you talk about them and do all this kind of stuff. It was really intensive. We had a facilitator that took our families through it, and we had wonderful response. But of course, the biggest criticism is how long it freaking took, and it wasn't scalable. So we developed, our Entrusted 1.0, and it was a software, and it was clunky and had a bunch of problems and whatever. So now about 2 years ago, we rebranded, we restructured it for a number of different reasons, retitled it Core Knowledge, not Cornology, right? People understand it. It sounds like Cornology, but knowing your core, right? And it's takes about 20 to 30 minutes for parents to go through it. Basically, everybody gets an email. You click on the link, you do it independently, right? Parents are about 30 minutes. The kids, it's about 10 minutes for them to go through it. And it generates a report. Again, all our learning software and so forth come into it, but it identifies for me what are my clients' core values, and what do I need to put into their estate planning and so forth. I mean, if you were to read my family trust, you would see that my kids and my death don't get anything. Now, I do that for a couple of objective reasons. And I see this a lot in even trusts that are currently in play. You say, when mom and dad die, we're going to set up a trust for each of the kids' benefit. We're going to, divide it and give them an equal share of the estate. When they're 18, 25, 30, whatever, we're going to distribute it to them outright. I do not do that. And I do it for really three reasons in my case, but two I think are objective that everybody ought to amend their trust tomorrow to say, which is don't give it to your kids outright, because if you do, you make it part of their estate for estate taxes. right? Estate tax is this tax that when you die, if you're too successful, the federal government's going to tax you again, and some state governments as well, depending upon where you live. Now, the federal estate tax only affects individuals with estates in excess of 13.99 million. And then if you're married, that's times two. Each spouse gets that estate tax exemption. So 27.98 million now can pass federally through to your kids estate tax free, but every dollar above that will be subject to a 40% estate tax. The issue with the estate tax, though, is it's always going to change. I mean, in the last 23 years that I've been practicing, it's changed, I think, 15 times, and it's set to change at the end of this year. Okay. Right. We're in 2025 for whoever watches this, but at the end of this year, December 31st, that all changes. And next year, we will go back to what the law was under President Obama. And it will mean about half the amount. 14 million that a married couple can pass estate tax free, or 7 million as as an individual, with a 35% tax on anything over and above it. And I don't think that over the long haul here, the government is going to need less money. Okay, I think taxes are going to go up, and we're in this historically high amount, right? Almost 28 million, and there are very, good things that you can do to try to avoid that estate tax. I truly believe that the federal estate tax is a negligence tax, and the only people who pay it, right, are those who fail to plan. And I have an arsenal of tools for people to get as stinking wealthy as possible. We just need that estate to grow outside of their estate tax purposes. But if my mom passes away, which I hope she never does, I love her to death. I'm a mama's boy through and through. I talk to her every morning on the way to work. I don't want this lovely woman going anywhere. But remember, my grandpa was a successful person. She was an only child. She's a financially successful person right now. The last thing I need my mom to do at her death is dump on top of me half of her estate, because I do okay for myself, and I hope to have an estate tax problem. And if I have a 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, $40 million estate, the last thing I need my mom to do is dump on top of me half of her estate. Because now my net worth increases by that amount. And then when I die, as the assets pass through my estate, those same assets my mom left me are now subject to a third estate tax, right? I mean, the estate tax is abhorrent in my mind. Remember what I said, I hate taxes, but this idea that you tax people who make more money, if you look into that, that's a Marxist philosophy, okay? But it is what it is. And the estate tax has this weird history. It was there to pay usually for a war. And then the war would end and the estate tax would go away, but it's just stuck around since, about the 40s, I guess, 50s. Get that number always confused in my head. But anyway, so it is what it is, and we got to keep that in mind. And now, if my mom passes away and how I've set her estate plan up, because she's my most important client, something happens to her, I don't get anything outright. I get a trust for my benefit that she, creates at that time, that exists for my entire lifetime. Now, I'm not completely altruistic here. I want to enjoy the assets that my mom might leave me. And by it being in a trust for my benefit, it's there for my health and education and maintenance and support and all of these various things. But the assets aren't mine for estate tax purposes. When I die, let's say I hit the Powerball and I'm worth $500 million. Anything that is in that trust that my mom left me will generationally skip the estate tax and go on to her grandchildren, not subject to an estate tax. So we skip a generational level of that estate tax. So that's one objective reason. Don't leave it to your kids outright, leave it in a trust. Another objective reasons is I don't want my clients to do at their death with their assets what I know for an absolute certainty they will never do during their life. I mean, for a client's life, which I hope is long and happy, um, their kids, let's say, experience an issue in their own life. Maybe they have a marriage that doesn't work out. Maybe they start a business and it fails and they have to declare bankruptcy, or they injure somebody in a car accident. Excuse me. That's their problem. And their creditors can go after their assets all they want. However, if your estate plan, which would say, if you haven't done any estate plan, the probate code in your state will say your kids get it all at 18, or if your trust says they get it all at 25, well, it now becomes part of their estate. It gets commingled with marital assets potentially, gets subject to a divorce, and I promise you it would be taken by a creditor or a bankruptcy trustee. My mom passes away. She leaves me a trust with half of the estate in it for my benefit. Ward, you sue me. I'm the beneficiary of that trust, not you. Right? And the trustee of the trust would be violating their duty to give an asset of the trust to somebody who wasn't a beneficiary. Now, luckily, my mom has this crazy notion that I know how to run a trust. And so she said, Andrew, you can be the trustee of your own trust. A lot of my clients don't want to do that, right? They have a whole lot of faith in their kids and say, I'd rather have somebody else control it for the rest of their lives. And I've met some of these kids and I agree with their parents. But in my case, you said, okay, look, you can be your own trustee. So I can decide how the assets in that trust are used, managed, invested, and so forth. But it's protected. I mean, I could declare a bankruptcy, come out the other side of the bankruptcy with the assets in that trust entirely intact. Your daughter goes through a divorce, it doesn't get taken from her in a divorce proceeding. It can't even be used against her in alimony determinations, right? Can she support herself? Doesn't matter. The trustee can't give it to anybody but her. It cannot be used as a source of income. It is tremendous protection. I mean, one of the problems, let's say, which is probably too harsh of a word as well, but with asset protection is most of the strategies that you put into play, and even ones that I put into play for clients, have a crack in the armor, meaning a way for a bloodsucker like me to cause problems. And they could say, hey, look, you don't own the asset now, but you used to. Yeah, you put it into an LLC or a trust in Nevis, but you used to own it. Or the money that was made to buy that asset was generated by you, right? You were the one running your dental practice and making the money. And yeah, you took the money and put it into a trust. But because of that, we can trace it back to you. And you just quite honestly never know what a court or a jury might do. Okay. But here, if you were to come after me and this money is inside a trust, my argument is, Ward, it's not that I used to own those assets and now I don't. I've never owned them. How could you go after an asset that I have ever owned? It is tremendous. It's probably the best asset protection planning that anybody could do with no downside. Again, if you trust your kids, you can allow them to control the trust that they now have. In fact, it's great for them. It's protected from creditors. It's not going to be taken from them from a divorce. They, might not want to sign a prenuptial agreement. I love prenuptial agreements, but they might not want to sign one. And you now know that what you're leaving them as a legacy won't be taken by that divorce. It solves a lot of problems. So again, I'm talking about a lot now, but let me just summarize. Number one, keeping it out of their estate if they have their own estate tax issue. Number two, probably more importantly, keeping it away from bad actors that might come into their life. Now, the objective one, or the subjective one, which is if you were to read my trust, not only does it stay in a trust for their lifetime, that trust will be governed under our chronology report, right? Our 40-page report that talks about our core values. And now my trustees, because my kids are 19 and 17 and 15, and I love them to death and I give a lot of grief about them, but they're good kids. And I think they've got brains somewhere inside their heads and they're going to turn out fine. But I still wouldn't give them control of everything tomorrow. So I have a board of trustees that will manage it for their benefit. But now my kids, like let's say my son wants to start a business because even though I'm a blood-sucking vampire lawyer, I also fancy myself an entrepreneur, right? We've got our firm, which is definitely a business in and of itself. We've got Cornology, which is really having some cool momentum right now, and we hope to have a potential exit out of that at some point in time. These are all, fun things, and it's kind of fun to build a business, and I encourage that within my kids. And one of our core values as a family is to kind of productivity and those kind of things. So anyway, now my son goes to him and says, "Look, I want to take some money out of my trust, and I want to use it to go start a business." My board's going to listen to him. They're going to say, "All right, your dad says we want to, based upon the whole chronology report," and I misspoke there, not that your dad said, but that the family agreed on as the legacy, that it says we're going to support that. But we're not just going to write you a check, right? My kids have to go to my board and have a business plan prepared. Now, when I put this in there, it's been a couple of years. I actually need to update mine, right? Cobbler's kids don't have shoes. But when I put this in there, it was before this whole AI thing that's going on. If anybody writes a book after 2024, I'm not going to believe they actually wrote it. But this client of mine, he sent one that he had AI generated, and it was just really actually pretty cool. He took his chronology report and he ran it through AI and said, I want to have a 60-page basically life anthology of our family, and it was. I mean, AI is not perfect, but it was incredible in terms. In fact, we're looking at incorporating some of our AI to do that for clients to, when they have their report, it proposes some kind of a family story, 60-page story like that. Anyway, be that nor here nor there. But you take that, and my board says, okay, your dad's going to do it because of all of these various reasons. But what you're going to do is you're going to prepare the business plan, and we're going to go over the business plan with you to make sure it's a viable business. And I have some key players in my life, people that I rely on that are going to play that board of trustee role. And they now can work with my kids, help develop a business plan. My kids are going to be held accountable. I mean, first of all, it's not just going to be a distribution, it's going to be considered a loan that
Mm,
they have to pay back.
mm,
And there's going to be a gradient to that. My kids could borrow 500 from our family bank, we call it. That name is thrown around a lot these days as well. But they can borrow from it and, interest free. Now they pay it back. We go take it up to 1,000, 5,000. Right? They're earning credit, right? They're learning accountability. But what they also need to do is they need to report back to the bank, which is the family. And then you just say, what's going on? How did that all go? How did your business go? I know my kids are going to make mistakes. We all have, right? We've had failures and you learn a lot from the failures. But I'll be really upset if all of my kids make the same mistakes, right? I want them learning from each other. So I'm creating that accountability, but I'm also creating hopefully cohesion. I think we would all love to have our family be together long after we're gone, having Thanksgiving dinner together. And if my kids, as we're growing up and they're working together and they're cohesive in this idea and this overall plan, then it's because they're meeting and they're having to be held accountable to each other and they're giving each other constructive criticism. Maybe they're going on to go partner with each other on something. A lot of people shy away from family businesses. Look at the billionaires out there. They don't, right? The Rockefellers, Rothschilds, they centralize their family money. They don't branch it out. It's one of the erosive effects of wealth transfer, the division of the estate. How do you hold that all together? So there's all of these impactful things that come with also that idea of not just giving it to your kids when they're 18.
mm.
Probably well more than you wanted to have me go over there, Ward.
No, no, not at all, not at all. I think you uh, just brought everything together. How you summarized everything in this whole idea of the family bank, But what does that really mean? And um, I'm sure people are going to want to know. You know what I'm saying? They really want to know. And I know we're kind of running out of time, but man, this has been really, really like so impactful.
You're flattering. Please, I appreciate it. Again, I told you as we were coming into this meeting that my wife pays me to not talk. So anytime people are listening to me, I'm happy.
Yeah, I encourage everyone to that's listening or to this episode, this podcast, is to actually definitely buy the book and then investigate chronology. You'll find some things there that will definitely resonate with you for sure.
Well, and I don't know about you, I'm sure you do. I love reading.
Yes.
I try to get through as many books as I possibly
Yeah.
can. It definitely goes in waves. We
Yes.
just went through the tax season, so I haven't gotten through the couple. And I always start them, and we have a small ranch up in Montana, and it's about a 4.5 hour drive, so I have some great time to listen to stuff.
Mhm.
But both books, entrusted, building a legacy that lasts,
Mhm.
and then riveted 44 values that change the world, which is the kind of goes more into how the values interrelate with your human life experience and how that's incorporated. Both of those are on Audible. Because I have to get through books through Audible. I can't read them any longer. I read contracts all day. So now, unfortunately, for everybody that gets entrusted on Audible, it's my horrible voice reading it for about 4.5 hours. The second book, Riveted, I had one of my clients who's a Emmy award-winning voice actress, and she reads it, and it's actually more pleasant to listen to. But yeah, on all the normal platforms and all that kind of fun stuff.
Awesome, awesome. So, if someone wanted to get in touch with you and use your services. How would they do that, Andrew?
Yeah, so always email introductions. I don't know if they're working in with you. I don't know understand a lot how your group is operating, but if they work with you directly, email introduction is wonderful. They're welcome to reach out directly. The best email for me, I was kind of embarrassed by this email because it sounds corny, but it's Team Andrew at yorkhowell.com. So just Team Andrew, and that's YORKHOWELL.com. It goes to me, but then it also goes to my two paralegals and my three assistants and an associate. I miss emails. I hopefully I'm learning more and more of my character flaws, and that's one of them. So they're much better about getting back. What they'll do is they'll set up a meeting. Usually I like at least 60 minutes. A lot of times I prefer 90 minutes. And it will be a few minutes with more of my background and some other things that are important and are kind of defining the attorney-client relationship, setting those tones, and then really spending at least an hour, if not more time, with me getting really nosy. And I want to know about the family. I'll certainly dive into the kids, and I want to hear all of their successes and any concerns that are going on, and really understand that. And then once I've heard, what their goals are and what they're trying to accomplish, then I'm really heavy in education. I'll take them through probably another 30, maybe sometimes 45 minute of this is what you should do, but not just what, why. Why is it important? I mean, I think that's an important, I love Simon Sinek's start with why, right? And otherwise, what value is it bringing into your life, and why are you paying some bloodsucker money to do this all for you? But what I also like about that is another thing that I love about my practice. I don't really feel like a lawyer, and I love attorney jokes, but another thing is I have long-term relationships with clients, right? I've been representing people for 23 years because it's not like I take on a case for you, the trial's over, and I never talk to you again. This is an ever evolving thing, and I try to be really, really proactive with clients. I mean, I encourage them to be proactive with me because I'm not living in their shoes on a daily basis, and I'll never bill a client because they send me an email. Now, if their email says, Andrew, we hate our children, I'm going to say, we got to get on the phone and talk about that's a big change. So I was like that big proactive. But then at least once a year, even if I don't hear from them, they're going to get an email from me checking in. How are you doing? Do you still like your kids? Have you bought any new assets that should be in your trust to avoid probate? Have there been any changes in the law that affect you? Right. And I like that kind of long-term relationship with clients. But if I give them a good understanding and maybe be overly educational, they'll know when to pick up the phone and call me. They'll understand the need to have those annual reviews, and our relationship just is that much more efficient. And honestly, they get a better result. I mean, I can't tell you how often I review an estate plan that hasn't, again, been reviewed for 18 years. There's assets that are all over the place. They're titled in personal names. They're not in trust, right? That's not going to avoid probate. And it's going to, you make your family have to get a lawyer. Remember what I said earlier? One of my goals is to help lawyers stay out of your life,
Hmm.
right? You get involved in a lawsuit, you have a solid asset protection structure to encourage settlement. Yeah, 30 million new lawsuits are filed every year. 95 to 98% of them get settled before they ever get all the way through trial.
Hmm.
So, having that solid understanding of how that all operates and fits into play, not just not just for my benefit, right? Understanding the client, but for them understanding how they need to maintain it. Right? Two enemies here, the IRS. And I want to make this clear. I play within the tax code. I have an adage when I do tax planning for clients, which is nobody's going to jail, especially me, right? But what kind of things can we use and structure and play there? And then on the asset protection side, you mess up, or another associate dentist in your office does something wrong, hits a nerve in somebody's mouth and their face droops forever. I don't know, right? These horrible horror stories that I hear about. I had this sadistic dentist growing up, so I have my own feelings about the dental world, and I'm sure everybody else has their own feelings about the legal world as well, right? But if that happens, the person who that happens to would love to destroy any asset protection structure that we put into play. And of course, the IRS would love to destroy any tax structure we put into play and say you don't get that tax benefit. Now, the IRS and creditors basically can make the same argument against you. They're called two very different things, but on the IRS's side, they refer to this as substance over form. That the IRS can look through the form of any business structure or transaction and look substantively what is really going on. And if they determine it to be tax evasive or abusive, you don't get the benefit, and sometimes you go to jail, right? They got Al Capone on tax evasion. And then creditors, they get to say the same thing, but it's called corporate veil piercing, right? That you haven't given the corporate structure any respect, and they can pierce through that veil and sue you directly as the owner. And they're successful the same way the IRS is, which is to show you just haven't been running it the right way. You haven't given it respect. You've been buying your groceries out of the corporate account, right? And people have a tendency to be not great at that. I mean, you're running businesses, you're trying to make money, you're paying taxes, you're raising family, life gets busy. So, yeah, it's again probably a much more winded answer and probably going off track a little bit here. So,
No, I appreciate that because this is going to definitely need a part two.
look, I'm happy to, and
Yeah,
I
this is going to
know,
definitely need.
and there's so many. One of the things that I have also a problem with is so much misinformation out there. My colleagues are so tool heavy. They'll just throw out trust and asset protection trust and irrevocable trust in Nevis and LLCs in Wyoming and domestic asset protection trusts in Nevada. And you should do this and you should do this. And the client's going, what? This isn't what I do. I went to dental school, right? Or, I do a lot of speaking at the medical school here at the University of Utah because they come out of medical school as dental clients do as well with debt. They don't have anything,
That's
but
right.
they're usually pretty good income earners over time, and they need planning over the long haul. Um, anyway, I forget where I was going with that, but you can remind me where the question was.
No, it's just that I wanted to just make sure we do a part two on
Oh
this
yeah.
also.
So my point on that is I was saying there's all of these various things. And one of the things that a lot of times I'll do for podcasts like yours or whatever that are, trying to educate their group, which is so incredibly valuable. And groups like this are so powerful. But um is to try to help calm some of those fears because not every tool is gonna work for everybody, right? What you want to do in your planning with your family is going to be completely different than mine.
Mhm.
Absolutely, there's going to be similarities, but you need to understand again what you're building to understand the tool. And I hate that tools just get thrown out.
And then the core values is going to change all of that as well. I mean, people are going to have different core values and what that's built on and connecting that to the actual asset. It's a whole different kind of ball game or field, would you say?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a fabulous point. I mean, from a selfish standpoint,
Mhm.
professionally speaking, it allows me to have good contact with my clients.
Mhm.
I mean, I also get to have the ability to have contact with their kids.
Mhm.
And I would bet, even if you out there are listening to this and you have great relationships with your fantastic advisors, what kind of a relationship does your advisor have with your kids? I mean, 80% of the time when somebody dies, they leave their advisors, the beneficiaries do. And it's because there is no connection. I mean, the next generation that's coming up, they want to get their advice from Google or from AI. They want to do their investing with AI or they want to follow Nancy Pelosi or whatever, right? They don't want the same traditional things that everybody else used to want to have. And you're just going to have to create some kind of a different level with that.
Right.
And this allows me to know their kids and that next generation and create that bond. Again, what my grandpa did with us, we were in the meeting with the advisors. We knew who our accountant was. We knew who our financial advisor was. I mean, not only is that critically important just for people to know who to call if something happens to you, but if you now have that personal relationship, it is again just a world of difference and an incredibly meaningful impact on the family and what their ultimate result is. Again, ultimate result, at least what I think most people want to have, financial stability, but a good solid family that stays together, loves each other, appreciates each other, has gratitude. David and I wrote an article for Trust and Estates magazine back in 2017 or 2018.
Mhm.
I'll never write one of these damn things again. It's our peer-reviewed thing, and it's annotated, and it's got to go. It's just you guys have these dental journals, I'm sure as well. This is ours. Atrocious. Writing two books was way easier than doing this thing. But the titled this book or this article, "Grats versus Gratitude." It's on our website as a resource on the resource tab. But the purpose of that title, Grats versus Gratitude, is a GRAT, which stands for Grantor Retained Annuity Trust, is one of these vehicles that people will use to transfer wealth from one generation to the next, estate tax free. Now, I personally feel there's a lot better things, but the point of the title to our colleagues was, what are you doing when you're crafting an estate plan? Are you trying to pass the most amount of wealth like a GRAT does? Or would you rather create grateful families? And you ask a client that. You say, hey, look, would you rather your kids have a bunch of money when you die, or they're grateful, successful on their own and being together? Well, everybody would choose the second, right? I think most people would. I do have clients that say, look, I'll just give it to them all. I'm dead. I don't care anyway.
Right.
That's just not me, right? I'm somewhat of a control freak, but
Mhm.
yeah. So again, long-winded. I apologize, Ward, but I'm happy to follow it up anytime you'd like.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, I'm sure there's, like I said, that people want to know more about, even how to develop a team. A board of directors. You know, who are these other advisors in the family? What type of team is that going to consist of? Those kinds of things are important.
Fabulous. I mean, all wonderful points that I'd
Yeah,
be, happy to
that's
spend
what
as
it's
much
all about.
time on point by point. And I think maybe a great thing for you guys to do as a follow-up is find out, what are the most common questions that people have with it. I
Yeah.
was last week I was down in Austin speaking at an event, and I spent 2.5 hours on stage in front of, it was like 100 couples, so 200 people, and they were all high net worth, $15 million plus clients. It was, hey, this is what you'd be doing, and that's how it was presented to me. Andrew, we want you to sort of say, what should a say 14 million and less client be doing, and what should a 14 million plus client be doing? But it turned into just a question and answer session. Is people start There's so much information out there. I mean, it's a wonderful world we live in. Anything we want to know is at a finger, tip,
Yes.
touch. But
Yes.
the problem with that is that, how do you decipher that?
That's right.
Right? I could go, I guess, try to learn how to do a root canal. I mean, I'm sure I could look at a YouTube video online about, and I'm sure there's a video on it because I like the pimple popper videos, right? But I'm sure there's like some root canal video. And I'm not going to do my own root canal. I'm going to try to do it on my own. And so anyway, going off on just tangents, but this is unfortunately how my brain works, and one of the many reasons why my wife hates me.
Well, with that, man, man, it's been great. It's been wonderful. Just as I told people from the very beginning, we just scratching the surface here. So, Andrew, thank you again for coming in and giving us just this a snippet of the impactful information that's definitely and will definitely change lives. Um,
I hope so. That'd be great. Yeah, we hope so. I mean, we say that as the primary goal of Cornology, which is to help with this wealth transfer. I mean, it is enormous that what's going to happen, and if people can put more thought and really at a reasonable time commitment into how that's ultimately going to operate, it is it makes, and when we wrote that article, Grats versus Gratitude, it makes the family that if they're really open about what's going on, 85% more likely to be having Thanksgiving dinner with each other the year after mom and dad dies. I mean, we have a saying in the estate planning world that you never truly know a person till you share an inheritance with them, right? And that's true, right? I have seen families that I thought were just going to sell
oh,
through the process
yeah.
seamlessly, decide
Yeah.
to roll up their hands and fight. And I have seen families that for sure were going to fight get through it seamlessly. You just never know because it's almost this chemical reaction, right? You lose this major part of the family and you go through all of the agony and heartbreak of all of that.
Mhm.
And then, we're around our families, and as human beings, we have a tendency to project to those closest to us. And so you say, hey, look, the money in the bank can usually be divided pretty equally, but when it comes to mom's engagement ring, no, I want that and I'll fight to the death over it. So again, another reason to create that family harmony by planning it out, right? Even if you said, look, you're getting the engagement ring and you're not, they can be mad at you all you want or all they want, but you're 6 feet under, right? Who cares? They're not mad at each other. So having that good planning is just so critical for that family harmony. And again, I would expect that's a big goal of all of ours.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, thanks again, Andrew, and we're going to talk again soon. Get
Yeah,
that,
my pleasure.
get
Thank
that,
you so much for having me. It's an honor.
yeah, definitely get that scheduled for part two.
Sounds good.
The Wealthy Dentist podcast is built on connections, opportunities, and meaningful conversations that help jumpstart careers and boost the ROI on your business. Is there a topic you're passionate about or someone in the dental community who should share their story with us? We want to hear from you. Email your suggestions to the Wealthy Dentist Podcast at gmail.com, and let's create content that informs, inspires, and uplifts the dental world. Your ideas could spark our next big conversation. Let's make it happen. I'm Ward Powell, your host at the Wealthy Dentist Podcast, thanking you for being a part of our journey.